You have to use the different levers of state power: diplomatic, military, sanctions, economic, punitive measures, in order to get across to China that we are not an acceptable target for hacking. Our critical infrastructure has been hacked, energy networks, transportation networks. This is offline. We should not be able to have American networks at risk, held at risk constantly by the Chinese military.
I want to hear more about our offensive capabilities, the extent to which you can talk about them. We hear about hacking back. We hear about, well, we could go turn the lights out if we wanted to. What is the United States actually capable of doing, having seen the offensive nature of China's posture against us?
The U.S. has long been postured aggressively to go after China's networks, right? Where there are hacks against the U.S., we need to be able to hold people to account, right? Cyber Command is one of those key agencies that's able to do that. Now, the question really happens when, or the question that we continue to grapple with here is now, how do we show China that it's unacceptable to go after critical infrastructure, and at the same time, we really need to be able to partner with other countries in the region who will help hold China to account as well.
Well, when we're considering partnerships, to what extent is this a public-driven effort versus having to partner with the private sector, especially, Laura, considering what we're seeing in the federal government right now with a culling of the workforce in many areas? I know you have some concerns about the impact that is going to have on our cyber capabilities in particular. Can you just speak to that?
Yeah, we're really worried that the level of talent that you have in the federal government, particularly technical talent that's been recruited from the outside, if those folks leave or if those folks are pushed out, that's a real hit on America's cybersecurity actions. And here's why. Our networks in the U.S. are overwhelmingly private networks, right? Our water systems, our energy systems, these are run by private companies or utilities. We need people who can take that information about what adversaries are doing and push it out to the front lines of the folks who are able to protect those networks.
China left a lot of breadcrumbs in Salt Typhoon. Do we have a handle on the bugs, if you will, that are in our system, if they infiltrated utilities, water treatment systems, and so forth? What are they doing in there, and how do we get them out?
Look, Salt Typhoon, which back in January, a Treasury action showed that this was the Ministry of State Security, the intel guys in China, who went and hacked over 9 U.S. telecommunications providers, right? That gives core access to Americans' user data, to Americans' information. That's a huge espionage operation and a big win for China. The other big problem on this digital breadcrumbs is where the Chinese military has put pre-positioned access, sort of open doors, sleeper cells, into U.S. infrastructure that could cause chaos and really sow a level of doubt in people's basic ability to go about their day.
Are we still vulnerable, or can we get these open doors closed?
We're still vulnerable. I mean, this is one of the really hard challenges that we have here, and the asymmetry of the U.S. is a really digitally connected place, right? And in some sense here, we've got to really push better cyber defense and cyber security on the water plants, on the energy plants that are sitting there as the front line between nation-state adversaries and the American people.
Well, and when we're thinking about nation-state adversaries, obviously concerns around that go beyond China, thinking specifically of Russia here, especially in light of the mixed reporting we have gotten about the Pentagon and Cybercom potentially ceasing operations when it comes to Russian cyber activity. Specifically, how concerned are you about that? What would that actually do to our ability to counter threats like this, or gather intelligence even?
Russia's a core adversary in cyberspace for the U.S. If we stop planning operations, if we stop any of the muscle memory that goes into building packages that are able to target and counter aggressive Russian activity against the U.S., that'll really put us behind. And it's that constant ability to understand how Russian activity goes at U.S. networks that we've got to keep our eyes on and really keep people focused on in the government if we're going to win this domain.
Could we wage a cyber war? Do we have the tools that would be required to do this in a real sense?
The U.S. has the preeminent capability in this space, but Russia,
we're careful
China,
about using it.
We're careful about using it. We follow the rule of law. Like that is what sets us apart from authoritarian regimes in Russia and China, and that's a core difference on how we're operating in this space.
Well, at least how we've been operating in the space. Do you sense that there's going to be a shift in this kind of cyber policy from this administration? Have they actually articulated the way in which they're approaching threats like these? We certainly didn't hear anything about cyber or even artificial intelligence, for that matter, in President Trump's address last night.
I think that's the right question. One of the huge issues that we've collectively been grappling with for years now that I am curious to see how this administration takes on are ransomware actors. These are criminal groups almost always based in Russia, and they're holding American hospitals hostage through their network security practices. We've had ambulances diverted from ransomware attacks. Are these folks going to have consequences pushed against them in Russia? That's a big question and really critical for Americans.
I want to know about your experience today. You were called to testify on Capitol Hill in front of a very important committee that is taking the time to get into this, I think we've already established, very important story. Do these lawmakers know what questions to ask? Are they read in? Do they understand the threat?
I think the Hill understands that the level of espionage and attack capabilities that China wages against the U.S. is a really critical issue. The question is if we're going to really get serious about hardening our defenses. This is an offense game and a defense game, right? Are we going to put in place minimums? Are we going to put in place standards in certain critical industries so that we've got safer services that defend against the types of cyber attacks that we've been talking about?
Would that mean, though, providing resources for those in the private sector to fortify those defenses? Because certainly that's not without cost.
In certain cases, definitely. Water sector is a great example here. There's 50,000 different municipalities that have a touch on your water. These are not well-funded cybersecurity programs for the most part, right? How do we make sure that we get that funding, but also really that sense of priority that the devices that are being used to control the water tank in your county are actually protected?
So what's the follow-on here? Is it legislation, or was this a fact-finding mission that leads to more hearings?
I think the question is, how do you hold China account? And that's very much at the forefront of how legislators are thinking right now. Can we get more serious with non-cyber means, diplomatic, et cetera, to be able to hold China to account for what they've done in cyberspace? And it's that pairing that's really the question at hand right now.
Well, and that obviously goes immediately, in my mind, to tariffs, as we're seeing this administration now basically saying that they're using tariffs as a negotiating tactic to extract behavioral changes they want to see. Right now, they're talking about fentanyl production specifically, but could this also tread potentially into that realm, cyber?
I think grouping in the Volt Typhoon, which are the critical infrastructure accesses that the Chinese have, would be one way to say this is the unacceptable behavior that we're seeing out of China, and linking it to something that China's already starting to feel.
When you look at this administration versus the Biden administration, which I believe you worked for, when it comes to the approach to cyber, a cohesive policy, is there any difference between the two?
Look, holding cyber adversaries to account has been the core and central policy now for multiple administrations. How you do it is the hard part. And the other piece that's so tough in the U.S. is because cybersecurity has been neglected from just a baseline standpoint at so many companies and in so many sectors, we are incredibly vulnerable. And the more we throw out there, the more we worry about retaliation as well. We have to up our own defensive game.
Just finally, Laura, on the subject of vulnerability, have you seen Zero Day, this new Netflix show? Is that a real possibility? I mean, this is a funny question because the show freaks me out, but the idea that you can take out basically all transit infrastructure, cause like a blackout nationwide, is that actually something that in the worst case scenario could happen to this country?
All right, I haven't seen a lot of Netflix, but I will tell recently, but I will tell you that back in 2017, there was a cyber attack that the Russians waged on Ukraine that took down the ports, that took down the banks, that took down a wide variety of society and really ground everything to a halt. How'd they get in? The TurboTax version in Ukraine was the way that they were able to pass that piece of malware in. So look, widespread effects have happened before, and we really need to make sure we've got secure systems so it doesn't happen again.